It is said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Yet, there is another commandment that is often less remarked upon, but which carries within it a certain profound mystery. Love your neighbor as yourself. This passage, as we find it in the Gospel, has not only echoed through centuries of Christian reflection, but also through the deepest concerns of human life. There is a remarkable clarity in this command, and yet also an unspoken paradox. We are to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But what does this mean? If we are to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, then how are we to first love ourselves? Is this command not somehow asking us to balance between the self and the other? And what does it mean to say that God wants us to take care of ourselves first? It is in the curious relationship between self-care and care for others that we may find a key to unlock a deeper understanding of Christian life. To understand what it means for God to want us to care for ourselves, we must first consider the nature of care itself. Care is not simply a matter of attending to one's physical needs, as if we were some machine to be properly maintained. Care, in the truest sense, involves an acknowledgement of one's inherent worth and a recognition of the sacredness of one's existence. In many ways, the nature of self-care is not merely the practice of looking after one's health or material needs, but rather of recognizing the divine image in oneself, a recognition that carries with it the heavy burden of stewardship and the quiet yet essential joy of gratitude. God created human beings in His own image, and in this act of creation He did not merely make a creature to be discarded or taken lightly. We were created with purpose and meaning. Each individual, each soul, bearing an imprint of the Creator's will. To care for oneself, then, is not an exercise in selfishness, but in recognition of this sacred image, which must be honored by tending to one's own well-being, both physically and spiritually. A true understanding of self-care from a Christian perspective arises when we see ourselves as vessels that are not our own, but belong to God. And if they belong to God, then it follows that their care is part of our duty as stewards. To neglect oneself is not a sign of humility or piety, but a form of irresponsible neglect toward the divine order. Now, of course, one might ask, how does this balance between self-care and the care for others work out in practice? After all, it is clear from the teachings of Christ that we are to care for others with great generosity and love. The parable of the Good Samaritan, for instance, reveals the heart of God's desire for us to serve and give to others without reservation. And yet, if we are called to care for others, how can it be right that we are also called to care for ourselves? Is there not a contradiction here? And yet, paradoxically, it is only by understanding and practicing self-care that we are truly able to give ourselves away to others. To take care of yourself, then, is not an act of selfishness, but one of readiness, preparedness, and health, so that you might better serve and love those around you. Let us consider the implications of self-care within the framework of Christ's teachings. We are not called to live lives of isolation, nor are we told that our actions are to be solely for ourselves. The Gospel does not propose that we retreat from the world or ignore the needs of others. Quite the opposite, in fact. Christ commands us to be in the world but not of the world, which suggests a dual responsibility, to live in this world, fully engage with its needs, and yet to keep ourselves from being swallowed up by it. We are to serve the world with love, but we are also to be mindful of our own well-being so that we do not lose sight of the very nature of the calling we have received. Consider the analogy of the airplane's safety instructions. We are often told that in the event of an emergency, we should first secure our own oxygen mask before attempting to assist others. While this is practical advice on a physical level, it holds a deeper significance when we consider the spiritual dimension of our lives. We are no good to others if we ourselves are spiritually or physically depleted. If we do not tend to our own spiritual health, we risk becoming ineffective or even harmful in our efforts to care for others. The more one gives, the more one must replenish, whether that be through prayer, rest, or nourishment. Without this replenishment, the well runs dry and the work becomes a burden instead of a joy. Thus, God calls us to take care of ourselves first, not out of selfishness, but out of a deep and abiding wisdom that He knows will allow us to continue the work He has set before us. It is not a trivial thing to care for the body. In fact, the body is not merely a vessel or an object of biological function. It is part of the creation God declared to be good. In the beginning, the Creator looked upon His creation, and He saw that it was good. The body, then, is a good thing, worthy of care and respect. Too often in our culture we have come to think of the body as a mere thing to be used up, consumed, and discarded. This, however, is a perversion of the divine will. God calls us to treat the body with respect and honor, not as an end in itself, but as part of the larger whole of His creation. Taking care of oneself, then, involves not only ensuring one's physical health, but also tending to one's emotional and spiritual well-being. This is where the question of love and self-worth comes into play. To truly care for oneself is to believe that one is worthy of such care. The person who neglects their own needs may be acting out of a misplaced sense of humility or an unrecognized belief that they are undeserving, or they are unrecognized belief that they are undeserving. But to accept that you are worth caring for, that you as a person created by God are worthy of attention and love, this is the beginning of a deeper understanding of self-care. It is, in a sense, an acknowledgement that you are not just a collection of parts to be used for a task, but a beloved creation made by God for His purposes. This belief in one's inherent worth is a necessary foundation for true self-care, for only from this place of acceptance and respect can we engage with others in a meaningful way. Self-care also speaks to the necessity of reflection and renewal. In a world that often demands our attention and time, it is essential that we carve out moments for quiet, for prayer, and for the renewal of our spirits. To live a life of constant activity without reflection is to risk losing sight of the very purpose for which we live. God desires us to live lives of purpose, of reflection, and of conscious engagement with our own hearts and minds. In this way, taking care of oneself becomes an exercise in spiritual discipline, a commitment to living in alignment with God's will, with gratitude for the body and the soul that He has entrusted to us. In this, we begin to see the beauty of the Christian paradox. By caring for ourselves, we are better equipped to care for others. By making sure we are spiritually and physically well, we ensure that our capacity to serve and love others is not diminished. The act of self-care is not an isolated endeavor, but a means to an end. It is a necessary preparation for the work we are called to do. Christ did not call His followers to run themselves into the ground in a futile attempt at service. Rather, He called them to serve with joy, with love, and with a heart full of peace. A peace that comes from knowing that one is living in harmony with God's will. Therefore, taking care of oneself is not a luxury, nor is it a selfish indulgence. It is a necessary aspect of the Christian life. It is an act of stewardship, a recognition that the body and the soul we have are not our own, but belong to God. And because they belong to God, they must be treated with the respect, care, and reverence that they deserve. In taking care of ourselves, we not only honor God's creation, but also prepare ourselves to love and serve others with greater joy and effectiveness. Thus, God desires that we take care of ourselves first, not because we are more important than others, but because through this act of self-care, we are made ready to give of ourselves to others in love. This is not a message of selfishness, but of wisdom. It is the wisdom that recognizes that in order to serve others, we must first be able to stand strong and steady ourselves. And when we do this, when we truly care for ourselves as we ought, we find that we are better able to give ourselves away, to love others as Christ has loved us, with a heart full of grace, peace, and compassion.